Chapter 7. Tranquility Lost. Requiem paced his aquarium, although the term hardly did justice to this large glass bubble which sat under the ocean, next to an exotic reef far from any disturbances. In his confused and angered mind, he could not appreciate the tranquil view that surrounded him. The gliding and shoaling of the dazzling fish, and the sound of the currents cascading all around him could usually set Requiem's mind at ease, no matter what dark thoughts were churning in his head. Not this time, however. His presence in the aquarium was only a half-hearted attempt at forgetting his woes. Actually, Requiem was concentrating hard. Swinging his platinum pocket watch in a full circle, he struggled to make sense of everything that had happened. So lost was he in the torrent of his own thoughts, he did not see his beautiful sunlit ocean darken to a deep and stormy blue. Nor did he see the fish retreat from the reef, and the corals retract. No, his mind's eye had a grip on him, repeatedly playing the image of Tallis in the ballroom, with his keen eyes and sharp smile as he shattered Requiem's world. No, Requiem muttered to himself as he swung the watch harder. We would never banish anyone. Southgate is for those that don't fit anywhere else, not some isolated prison. Requiem massaged his temples with his free hand, and his footsteps became laboured and heavy on the flat glass floor stretching across the bottom of the bubble. The slowing of his pocket watch signified that Requiem was almost upon the one thought he needed to make sense of everything, to bring peace to his mind once more. There simply couldn't be a place for Akatsuki or even worse. Look at Akuma. Who could be more troublesome, dangerous, and terrifying than him? He even scares me. Ending his muttering on a jovial and dismissive note, Requiem laughed. No, there can't be a fifth gate of banishment. I'm sure I would have been sent there by now if there were. The heads of solitary fish hesitantly poked out of the cracks and crevices they had retreated to, whilst the large shoals began to slow their streamlined race away from the bubble. Requiem's pocket watch lost momentum and fell into a heavy pendulum swing as Requiem peeled his hand from his forehead and tipped his head back to stare at the top of the bubble, with his mouth agape. This was it. The tension was flowing out of Requiem, and all the negative energy that had been pulsing from him like a beacon, scrambling the aquatic electrical highways, was being drawn away by the current. Normality was returning to the miniature seascape. Wait! The stark pronouncement resonated around the bubble as Requiem flung his head upright and clenched his pocket watch. Where have all the nightmares gone? He paced around the bubble as new and unsettling thoughts rushed into his head. Besides Akuma, we have too few powerful people in Southgate. Not the ones of legends and nightmares. The glass bubble trembled with every confused and angered footstep, sending pulses of violent energy back out to sea. But they must have existed. To fight a war, they must have been able to do more than we can now. And what about the other gates? Where are their champions, their heroes? Sneezing would not have kept the nightmares at bay. No. There must have been a stronger generation, one that could realistically have taken on the world against the legions of United Hafuna and their technology. Where have they all gone? Why have we been lied to? And if this is all true, what about the book? Such was the ferocity of Requiem's emotions that the chain on his pocket watch snapped, sending the watch pounding into the glass bubble. The harrowing noise of metal hitting a glass bubble deep within the Earth's oceans jerked Requiem out of his dark and unsettled world. He stopped and opened his eyes. An unsettling silence engulfed the bubble as the ringing of the impact subsided. The ocean was almost black and utterly motionless, with not a speck of life to be seen. Only barren rocks stood where moments before there had been an abundance of vibrant life. Requiem cast his gaze around the bubble, looking for his lost tranquility. Condensation began to build from his heavy breathing as Requiem pressed his hand against the glass. The ocean had become too cold for any sun-loving marine life to survive. Wiping away the condensation and peering intently outwards, Requiem realised that the darkness had not been brought on by the night, but by the sand of the seabed sitting suspended in the water beneath a stormy sky. A writhing speck caught his eye, and he walked backwards to assess it, and soon understood. Whilst locked in his mind's eye, Requiem had let control of his powers slip to his subconscious. The impact of the pocket watch hitting the glass had shattered his thoughts, causing him to release all the energy and aggression he had built up, thrusting it back into the ocean. Like a detonating bomb, it threw up the seabed and blasted the fixed life from the rocks. This life became caught in the wake of the fish's escape, and now sat far away from Requiem's glass bubble in a mass of confusion. "I am sorry," Requiem said in a sombre tone. "I really don't know the strength of my own thoughts." As Requiem guided the once fixed life back to the rocks and settled the sand, the fish began to return to their idyllic habitat, and Requiem pondered what he should do. "I can't go on like this," he said to the fish, which were once again at peace. "Who knows what damage I could do? No, I must know. It's the only way. I must find this fifth gate and see it for myself. If there's no gate, then there's no problem. And if there is..." Staring deep into the ocean, Requiem spoke with cold determination. "If there is, then there'll be a whole lot of new questions." Turning away from the glass, Requiem added, "I can't tell anyone in Southgate about this. Just the thought would send them on a rampage. If it's true, then many of those banished must have been our brethren. No. At times like this, I need a level head, some wisdom and an open mind." With renewed vigour, Requiem strode ahead. A glass corridor melted into view, and he left the bubble in search of his closest friends. First on the list was Gio. His level head was just what Requiem needed to remain objective, and he knew that if anyone was to stand by him, it would be his best friend. Requiem jogged through the Red Pagoda Gate and into the ornate Japanese grounds, oblivious to the commotion he was causing even in the accepting North Gate. His head held high, Requiem put all his concentration into trying to see if he could spot Gio slumped under a maple tree or orange blossom somewhere, sleeping off his many meals. Accompanied by the sound of drowned bagpipes, Requiem tripped and fell to the ground. As he coughed and spluttered his way to standing on all fours, he heard a familiar voice. "That's unlike you. You're normally so aware. It's a shame poor Klein here had to cross you today." Breathless, Requiem turned on his side to see Gio and realised that he had in fact stepped on a huge cat. Taking in the enormity of the cat as Gio held it in his arms and stroked it, Requiem wondered how anyone could fail to see it, let alone trip. "Klein? As in German for small?" asked Requiem in bemusement. Staring into Klein's beguiling eyes, Gio replied sarcastically, "Wow, able to destroy the world with a flick of the wrist and multilingual too. He truly is a role model to us all." Getting up from the floor and dusting himself off, Requiem continued in a subdued tone. "Well, I wouldn't expect anything more than sarcasm from the person whose cat is so large it has its own gravity and bends light. You know, after I fell, I could see you coming from around the corner thanks to Klein here. Very useful. I think I'll be taking him on my next trip." Gio sniffed and raised himself up. "Well, you can't have him. He needs 8 square meals a day and 16 naps. It completely takes up all his time. He's far too busy to go on one of your adventures." Looking eagerly at Requiem, he added, "So take me instead. I'm working on bending light. One day I'll be known as the Black Hole." Gio held his fist high in the air in a triumphant stance, before looking around thoughtfully and adding, "Now, where do those pastries go?" Requiem smiled. Lowering Gio's triumphant fist, he said, "Thank you, fat friend. Let's go find the feeble one, and then swing by Babyfoot Champion of the World, and I'll let you in on a secret." Gio placed Klein in the tall grass next to them. Klein gave Requiem an indignant look before turning his tail on them both and slinking off to find a nice sleeping spot. Gio watched on like a proud father as Klein cut a swathe through the grass, tripping over several people as he went, before walking off with Requiem to Westgate and the portcullis. When they arrived, they found portcullis down, barring their entrance to the castle. Gio clapped his hands around his mouth and shouted jovially, "Knock, knock!" "Go away," replied a timid and croaky voice. "This is no place for Southgate dwellers. Go away." Gio called back to a pale-looking old man peeking out from behind the ramparts. "I'm of the North Gate, and he is with me. I assure you, no harm will befall you. Now, could you please let us in? We have business with one of your brethren." "Oh, we know who you are, Gio of Northgate. Note that even if you weren't with the Southgate dweller, we would still have the portcullis down, so we could hide all the pies." "How rude!" Gio snapped as he turned to Requiem with his hand raised towards the impetuous man. Requiem sighed, then smiled. "Oh well, suppose I should live up to my reputation." The creaking sound of bending metal and the splintering of wood echoed around the marble courtyard, making Gio contort involuntarily into awkward shapes as Requiem forced a large crack to appear in the mighty door. As he and Gio strode gingerly through the splintered gap, Requiem turned to Gio. "I've done my bit. Just make sure you eat all the pies, okay?" "No argument from me," Gio said, rubbing his hands with a glee. Just at that moment, Gio got his shirt caught on a wooden shard and began pulling at it gently, trying to peel it off without making a hole in his finest linen. Requiem stood in the dingy corridor that lay beyond the door, wondering why it was so dark. Looking up, he discovered that the entrance hall had no windows, and was instead lit by simple cast-iron candelabras hanging from the timbers of the pitched roof. It's no wonder these people always seem to wear little black spectacles. Hanging a few candles so high up is not going to throw much light on any situation, and I doubt they eat enough carrots, said Requiem to himself, shaking his head at the stupidity of the Four Gates' wisest. Meanwhile, Gio's gentle intentions had turned to vigorous tugging at his shirt to unhook himself from the splintered door. The fear of Uracil happening across him in such a pathetic state had driven him to desperation. Putting one hand on the ancient, dark grey stone wall with its many smooth chips and divots, and the other on the door itself, Gio pushed away with all his might. He wrenched the splinter from the door and freed himself, but, in the process, flew very unmajestically across the hallway. Crashing to the floor, Gio slid on his back along its smooth, irregular light grey pebbles before encountering the ornate blue Persian rug that lined the hall. Requiem closed his eyes, hoping that when he opened them again, everything would be composed and in order. Hearing something slide to a halt at his feet, he knew that was just wishful thinking. Requiem opened his mouth to chastise Gio, but before he could speak, dust plumed from a brass cone on a black bendy pipe to their right, followed by echoes of hysteria. Requiem went to investigate and shouted down the pipe. "You'll have to excuse Gio. He likes to give off an air of stupidity. It makes it easier for him to strike if his victims are laughing. Some have been known to faint before he deals even a single blow due to not being able to breathe for laughter. Now if you just give us all your pies and the location of Uracil, The rest of your masonry and fixtures will go unharmed, and, I assure you, your sides will not split. Heaving himself up to stand with Requiem, Gio fixed his shirt before leaning close to the pipe, listening intently. Dust once again plumed from the brass cone, and through their coughs and splutters they heard wild laughter. "Stop it! I'm crying!" rang the voice of a croaky old man between bouts of uncontrollable laughter. "Oh, we are done for. Northgate, the balance, the great unbalance if you ask me. Please, take the pies. Just don't try walking through any more doors. Oh dear, convert me a tissue. My nose is running." Ugh, that's better. Finally, the old man gained some composure and finished in an imperious tone. "Grand Master Urasil can be found in Library 1. "Library 1? How many does this place have?" asked Keogh disbelievingly as he cleaned his ear of dust. "More to the point, how do we get there?" asked Requiem as he cast his gaze around. 366, and like this," rang the old man's tinny voice from the pipe. Some of the large, smooth pebbles in front of them juddered momentarily before descending to make a spiral staircase of hovering flat stones. Gio and Requiem looked at one another, shrugged in silent agreement, and proceeded towards the stairs and Library 1. "You first," Requiem said politely. "I'm not having you land on me if you slip. My suit would never be the same again." "He'd better be in here," exclaimed Gio, looking back at Requiem as he descended. "I'm not going to check all 366 of these bookworm haunts, you know." "You wouldn't have to. If I'm not in Library 1, which has the oldest books, I can be found in Library 366, as the leap year library has the rarest books," called an agitated Urasil from within the depths of the library. As Requiem dismounted the last hovering stone, he came face to face with a very large book, which he had to duck to miss. "I ask you, what good are all these libraries when you can never find the one thing you're looking for?" muttered an increasingly agitated Urasil. Urasil was skimming the large dark oak bookshelves that filled the room. It had the same large pebble flooring as the corridor and great dark stone walls. Like the corridor, an ornate Persian rug covered the middle of the room, only this time it was red, and, like the room, circular. In the centre of the room, a little way from the floating staircase, sat a round open fire. Apart from the odd table, chair, and candelabra, the room was filled with row upon row of bookcases, holding what looked to be very ancient books indeed. In his mission to find what he was looking for, however, Urasil appeared to have lost any respect for the age of the books in Library 1. When a book caught his eye, he heaved it from the shelf, stared at it briefly, and then threw it behind him. Thankfully, Urasil could multitask and never let the books crash to the floor. Instead, they flew a little way, hovered, and then placed themselves back from whence they came. "There's no point, you know," said Keogh in a sombre tone. "You'll never find that noodle recipe from Tallis's book." Urasil stopped long enough to cast his eyes to the ceiling. "You should write a book on how to antagonise someone, Keogh. I'm sure you'd have no problem. You could even make it into a series. If you do, I'll put it as the first book in Library 94. Urasil continued unceremoniously pulling books from shelves, only to toss them behind. One book was flung with such force due to his growing annoyance that it ended up hovering over the open fire. As if the fire itself had a thirst for knowledge, flames shot up, engulfing the book. Requiem was quick to act and pulled the book from the fiery grasp. Instead of being burned, he channeled the energy into repairing the book as he walked over to Urasil. "You shouldn't be so hasty to discard what you've got in pursuit of what you want, my friend," Requiem said thoughtfully as he handed the book, still undergoing repair, to Urasil. "And I could do with you right now." Seeing that Requiem had restored the ancient property that was usually so dear to him, Uracil stopped turning the library upside down and agreed, albeit reluctantly. Gio slapped his hands and rubbed them together. "Great," he said. "Now where's the kitchen? I have some pies to consume." "Oh, you're too late. Pies were yesterday. Today the kitchen is preparing kippers," replied Uracil. Gio looked appalled. "Kippers? All too fishy if you ask me. Oh, and those little bones. Ugh." Requiem smirked. "Well, it looks like we'll have to come back another day to enhance your reputation. Why don't we go in search of Freya for now?" Requiem turned to walk up the stairs, only to find that they had gone. Turning and pointing upwards, he said, "Uracil, the stairs." "Oh yes, sorry." Uracil summoned the stairs, but neglected to warn Gio, who made the discovery himself when a large rounded pebble landed squarely on his head. "What?" asked Uracil innocently. "You can't threaten to eat all the pies and expect me to warn you about such things. I happen to like pies." "You wouldn't think of it to look at you," Gio mumbled through gritted teeth as he clenched his fist by his side. "Children, please. I go away for 5 minutes and look how you play." The voice belonged to Freya, who was now walking elegantly down the stairs.